started a couple minutes early so we don't bleed into the group after us. This is the Miamisburg High School Jazz Band. All right, to get started, we are going to play one of the biggest hits from one of my favorite artists, Stevie Wonder. This is an arrangement of Higher Ground. All right, you ready, Barrys? All right, 1, 2, and 1, 2, ready, hey! right, up next we're going to play a piece by the legendary jazz bass player Charles Mingus. A piece called Haitian Fight Song. And it uses actually some really cool classical musical techniques, but he does it in a really cool jazz style. So the whole song, the whole thing starts with literally one person. All right, our bass player Kale back here. All right, and then he's going to get grooving, and then we're going to add in literally one more person. You're going to hear Lucas on the bass trombone over here. And then we add in a few more people, and they start playing these different melodies that layer on top of each other. They kind of repeat over and over and over and over. And then it just kind of, until it's like chaotic, but still like cool. And then it kind of gets to a big point, and then it scales way back down. Builds up again, and eventually it ends, it cycles all the way back to where he's all by himself at the very, very end. All right? So it's a really cool piece. So this is Charles Mingus, this is the Haitian Fight. Right? You're all a bass player. trombone. There we go to Jacob on the trombone. Michael Fullcamp on the trumpet. Once again, Kyle Collar coming out to a saxophone. Up next is, we try to get a wide variety of styles in this band. So we're doing a little old-time swing for you. And if you were going to ask people if they know one old-time swing jazz band song, it's probably this one. This was made famous by the Glenn Miller Orchestra back in the 1940s. This is In the Mood. Ready and ready. 1, 2, and 1, 2, ready If you are a child of the 90s like I am, you probably remember like in the late 90s where like swing music somehow became like pop music for a while. It was a very strange time. But one of the bands that was kind of part of that whole thing was a band called Big Bad Voodoo Daddy. And this is a tune made famous by them. And it's a lot of fun to play. This is the Mambo swing. All right, what are we doing? Molly, you're up. Ariana, you want to play? Terrence? Terrence is in. All right. And then we'll get okay. All right, so it'll be trombone, 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 there. All right, 4. Very good. All right. All right. Ready. 1, 2, ready. Hey! Lucas. Give it up, Jacob. Terrence Pearson. We got Vincent Hammond on the Barry sax. And Stevie Parker on the drum set. All right, up next is a piece by Goodwin. He runs a jazz band out in Los Angeles called the Big Fat Band. If you've seen either of the Incredibles movies, they were the band in that. All right, that's probably how you most, if you're not a jazz band nerd, that's probably how you most likely have heard of the Big Fat Band. And this is a little more scaled down jazz piece, kind of an up-tempo fast swing called Terminally Hit. What are we doing with this? Daniel, you're up. Reese is not. You just gonna play? And then Lucas, you want to play? And then we'll let you go. I'll give you breaks and let you go. All right, so Daniel, Tyler and John, Lucas, Steve. All right? Got to make sure you cut these down. Solo back. All right? All right, here we go. Ready? And ready, 1, 2, and 1, 2, ready, hey! But I do want to recognize their seniors up on stage. Some of them I just recognized. Over on the tenor sax, we got Tyler Phillips. On alto sax, Jonathan Price. Also on alto sax, Kyle Colleran. Over here on the bari, we got Vincent Hammond. Bass trombone, we got Lucas Fulenkamp. Trumpet, Michael Fulenkamp. Eliza Ellis. We got Corbin Kekemeister. And back on the drum set, we got Judah Parker. I didn't miss anybody, right? I didn't miss anybody. I was a little nervous. So once again, thank you to everybody, parents. Thank you for all your support. These guys are so much fun. We do all this. We practice twice a week after school for a little over an hour. Put all this together starting in January. And I think they're just absolutely incredible group of kids. We have so much fun together. The amount of inside jokes that happen here are blow your mind. And I have no idea what's about to happen next because they don't tell me what they're about to do on the last song. So this could be an experience here for all of us. If you watched the Super Bowl this year, before the game, there was a version of America the Beautiful that had a singer and a trombone player. The trombone player was a guy by the name, he goes by the name of Trombone Shorty. If you haven't listened to his music, it's worth a Google. This is incredible. But this is one of his kind of best tunes. It's their favorite. Let them have a lot of fun. We just kind of figure out who's going to solo as the spirit moves them. Like I said, I have no idea what's about to happen. There's probably going to be a harmonica at some point. Yeah, okay. So who knows? All right, we just kind of let these guys have some fun, especially since it's their last one. So we hope you enjoy Trombone Shorty's Backatown. Ready? Cool. Michael's up first. There we go. Ready? And ready? 1, 2, ready? And. Thank you very much. Thanks for having us. We'll see you later.